They rolled in at dawn, a line of heavy trucks humming engines, a helicopter lowering like a punch in the sky, and the woman who'd spent months policing my lawn from her porch stood in her robe and called the police on me. Karen Mitchell pointed at my driveway like I'd started an invasion, shouting, "You can't just do that here," and then watched her authority crumble when a federal agent stepped out of a black helicopter and called me by name. I thought the worst would be a fine or a long HOA fight. I didn't expect to be the homeowner who forced my whole street to listen to a federal seal being read aloud. My name is Ethan Davis, and I live on a cul-de-sac in Maple Ridge Estates, the kind of place where everyone knows your dog's name and the HOA knows the exact shade of paint you used on your garage. For years, I kept my head down. I mowed my lawn, I fixed my fence, I said hello at the neighborhood picnic. But I also do work that most people don't think about. I'm an engineer. I've spent a career on infrastructure projects, and when an opportunity came to host a pilot for a national communications setup, it made technical sense and my property literally fit the map. I made a call, filled the forms the federal office required, signed non-disclosures I couldn't mention at the HOA meeting, and waited until it was time to begin. I did not tell Karen Mitchell. She was the self-appointed custodian of small-town order, head of the HOA security committee, loud, relentless an eye that watched over Maple Ridge for infractions like curb height and mailbox decorations. Karen's voice could make neighbors lock their gates and check their trash cans twice. She had humiliated me publicly once over a birdhouse I'd hung without a permit. She took pride in being the person who knew what everyone else was doing. So, when that convoy of concrete mixers and cranes pulled up and when I showed up in a high-vis vest with a folder stamped with a federal seal, well, she took it personally. "Excuse me," she yelled, her robe flapping phone in hand. "You're violating at least 6 bylaws. I'm calling the police." People came to their porches. Coffee mugs hovered. Officer Daniels pulled up in a patrol car, polite but cautious, and for a few tense minutes I felt like I was auditioning for trouble. Then a helicopter circled, lowered, and a man in a dark suit with a badge walked across the gravel like the morning belonged to him. He handed Officer Daniels a file, calm as a judge. "Standard verification," he said. "This site is under federal jurisdiction." Karen dropped her voice to a squeal and froze. That first day set the pattern. Karen screamed. She rallied neighbors, she called the HOA board, she made accusations. "You're tearing up our roads, you're lowering property values, you're hiding something," and she threatened lawsuits at a volume that suggested she'd practiced it. Walter Jenkins, the HOA president, tried to mediate and ended up looking like a man who had discovered his committee had become a circus. The federal team stayed, they put up cones, and the work began perimeter fencing scannings, the professionals doing the job they were hired to do. Until the digger hit something it shouldn't have hit. We weren't supposed to find anything. Surveys had cleared the area. The geotech says there's nothing down there but the bucket, scrapped metal. A smooth, curved surface showed through the clay, not rusted, not man-made in any ordinary way, a reflective dome with markings that looked like geometry more than letters. The reader on the handheld device went crazy. The helicopter's downdraft stirred dust into the neighborhood like a second sunrise. Karen, who had been so confident an hour before, went pale. Her hands trembled around her phone. "What is that?" she kept asking, as if the answer would let her reclaim control. If you'd asked me at that point whether I'd made a terrible mistake, I would have said yes for the quiet and the neighbors, for the way a man's life is supposed to be predictable. Late that night, I sat at my kitchen table under a single light, the folder with federal paperwork still on the counter, and the hum of the site like a second heartbeat under the town. I pictured headlines, "Local Man Brings Danger to Neighborhood." I pictured Karen on the news waving her clipboard like a banner. I pictured lawsuits and angry emails and people who used to smile in my direction turning away. Part of me wanted to pack a bag and leave Maple Ridge before anyone could blame me for whatever this metal thing was. I felt small, foolish, the kind of stupid you only feel when you realize you dragged other people into something you barely understood yourself. And then something happened that pulled me back from the edge. Agent Coleman, the man from the helicopter, asked me to come look at a scan in his trailer. He didn't scold. He showed me numbers and graphs, and under the clean emptiness of the charts was unexpectedly evidence of authorization tied to my name. Not from the HOA, from people with levels of clearance that shut down entire blocks. He didn't explain everything, but he handed me a copy of a document with the department's letterhead and my last name printed across the top. For the first time since the trucks arrived, the uncertainty shifted from a personal accusation into a problem bigger than any of us, one that had to be resolved with facts and experts, not pitchforks. That shift didn't make Karen stop. If anything, it made her angrier, and angrier people are dangerous in a quiet place. She started a door-to-door campaign, knocking on neighbors, whispering fear into chats and porch conversations. "They're hiding something. Ethan's hiding something," she said loud enough to be televised in the neighborhood group. Some rallied to her side, some stayed silent. The federal team moved closer, cordoning a wider perimeter, and the air filled with a strange electric taste. Our power flickered. Clocks stopped. Phones dropped calls with a crackle like static. And then, of course, she crossed the line. The warning signs were there. Agent Coleman had told us the site was federally restricted, but Karen determined to get her story slipped through a gap in the fencing one wet midnight and shone a flashlight where she shouldn't. The dome pulsed. The tarp rippled. A light white and absolute shot up like a blade. I yelled her name. Tom, her husband, tried to grab her robe. Someone's radio screamed. In the glare, the name Karen Mitchell burned across that smooth metal letters of light. She screamed the pitch of a woman losing everything she thought she controlled, and then there was static and silence. That moment is still jagged when I close my eyes. It is the moment of everything evolving from an HOA fight into an emergency that none of our bylaws could have prepared us for. Agents moved fast, containment protocol evacuations, restricted access, and a sentence I heard more than once: obstruction of a federal operation is a felony. Karen was pulled back, trembling, at first furious and then very small. Walter Jenkins stammered through a statement, and for the first time no one applauded his leadership or his clipboards. The neighborhood turned inward, curtains drawn, an entire community reevaluating which of our rules actually mattered. By then, I'd crossed the line too. I was not the neighbor who could stand aside and watch. Watching Karen being escorted away, angry, humiliated, I felt a strange calm. Not triumph, not even relief. Just the heavy realization that the story had been about power all along. She had power over the small things, fines, gossip, neighborly shame. But there are different kinds of power, and when a federal seal appears on your paperwork, all the petty forces fall quiet. I handed Agent Coleman copies of the communications I'd sent, the approvals, the signatures. I didn't shout it from the rooftops, I didn't need to, but when the facts are clear and the law is on your side, the shouting loses its energy. Karen didn't get to lead the next HOA meeting. Walter Jenkins had to answer for how things were handled. He had to explain why the board didn't know why they hadn't been consulted and why their bylaws were suddenly irrelevant in the face of national priorities. The board issued notices, and the neighborhood's gossip mill shifted from accusations to questions. The punchline in every conversation was the same: the world is bigger than our cul-de-sac. That doesn't mean the hurt disappears. There were people who were furious at me, who felt endangered or exposed, and that's fair. I had a duty of care I handled imperfectly. The last scene I'll let you picture without giving you a tidy resolution. Karen on her porch. No robe, no clipboard, looking like someone who has been stripped of a role she confused with identity. Officer Daniels took a formal statement. Agent Coleman shipped a file out to headquarters. Dr. Elena Park and her team ran readings that made my hair stand on end. I walked through the street, once barefoot in the dust, listening to the hum under our feet. There's a crater now, where the dome stood, fenced and monitored and alive in ways we still don't understand. Karen is under investigation for trespassing and obstruction. The HOA is reorganizing its process. Maple Ridge is quieter, but an undercurrent remains a low frequency you can feel at night if you stand very still. I don't say I'm innocent, like a man proclaiming moral superiority. I say I made a choice that had consequences, some expected, some not. I am responsible for those consequences. But power belongs to those who take it, and sometimes the person who pushes back the loudest in small battles is the least prepared for larger storms. Karen lost her crown because she mistook enforcement for leadership. The township learned what federal jurisdiction looks like up close. And me, I learned that secrecy can be a responsible tool sometimes necessary when lives and larger systems are at stake, but secrecy also breaks trust when we forget to bring people along. There's no parade for what happened. No trophies, no long celebrations. The good thing is simple and small. The order of our street returned in a way to its basic needs. Safety, truth. A clearer idea of who decides what. We are left with questions about what else lies under our feet and how we hold each other accountable without turning every disagreement into a war. Lesson power without humility becomes tyranny.